Hello, welcome back to the Rolling Darkness Review channel. Today, taking our celebratory hello shot out of our Clarkston, Montana mug, made for us by the great Karen Ellery. So, salute, Karen. Right. So, today I'm going to be reading to you from the 2010 Rolling Darkness Review chapbook and tour. That tour was called Curtain Call, and my story that year is called Shomer. And it starts with an epigraph from Friedrich Torberg, which goes like this: Melancholy can smile, sorrow cannot, and smiling is the legacy of my tribe. Shomer. So you'll do it? Aunt Jessica asked, holding Marty's hand as they stood in a ring around Uncle Al's body. Of course I will, Marty murmured. He couldn't tear his eyes away from his uncle's face. He'd never seen an unprepared corpse before, and what amazed him was how little like Uncle Al the body already looked. His eyes had come open right at the end, but crossed and out of alignment, like balloons that had drifted separately to the ceiling. His top lip, too, had slid sideways and looked frozen halfway toward one of those twisted mouth expressions Uncle Al had used to crack up first his nephews, then his children. On the other side of the hospital bed, El's son, Leo, glanced up at Marty. Through his tears, a wicked smile spread. El's smile. Want any of us to tell you what you're doing first? An hour later, over Blintz's in the deli where El used to sneak Marty and then, in succession, the rest of his nieces and nephews, and finally his own children off to midnight meals, Leo told him. Shomer, Marty repeated, through a mouthful of sweet cheese and sour cream. Outside, the drizzle drifted down through the dark and shrouded passing cars, the bus stop across the street, a pedestrian hurrying up his row house stoop so that everything looked wavy, wrapped in plastic. It means guard, said Leo, who'd taken one bite of his blintz and then sat staring into his plate. What am I guarding? Dad, Leo said, and Marty stopped eating. My dad. Marty stared at his cousin, then at his cousin's reflection superimposed in the dark window, wavering like everything else. I hadn't really heard of Shomer's either, Leo said. The synagogue asked, and Mom thought it sounded nice. The fact that Leo also hadn't known about it was a little reassuring. Every time Marty came east, he left aware of yet another blessing or ritual he didn't know, which made him feel yet again like a pretend Jew, and, more surprisingly, made him care. But this word he'd never even heard. In the diner light, Leo looked more hollow-cheeked than usual, his dark curly hair even greasier against his dress shirt collar. Of course, at 24, already a featured Salon.com columnist, Leo could still claim the look as a style and mean it. Whereas Marty, now 35, with his freelance technical drawing accounts drying up in the recession, and the gallery that had shown and occasionally even sold his paintings shuttering its doors, and with his last relationship long enough ago that his mother had started asking if there were any cute baristas at his local coffee shop, Marty's ongoing inability to hit each belt loop or get a tie knot all the way up under his neck just gave him away. At least, that's how it felt to Marty. The synagogue has a guy they pay to do it, Leo said. Most synagogues do. Did you know that? Don't tell my mom, said Marty. She might ask about the salary, on my behalf. Leo glanced up from his plate, his half-smile quick and grateful and his eyes full of tears again. For a moment, Marty felt like the cousin he'd always meant to be to El's children and hadn't quite become somehow. That cousin. Because El had certainly been that uncle, at least for a while. Professional Shomer, Leo said. It'd be a conversation starter. What do you mean, guard your dad? His body. Someone's supposed to sit with his body every second until it's in the ground. Like in the embalming room? Jews don't embalm, moron. Oh, yeah. Marty blushed and scooped up another forkful of blintz, but didn't lift it. I knew that, actually. Remember Grandpa in his coffin, with all that makeup on him? The Grandpa action figure, said Marty, and this time Leo smiled all the way. I forgot about that. At his death, their grandfather had weighed well over 350 pounds, and his prepared body had looked so little like him, the face so rosy-cheeked but devoid of even one of his 1,000 trademark expressions, that Marty's father had said he looked like a G.I. Joe. And for the rest of the Shiva week, As mourners brought soup and kugel and sat on Grandpa's couches under the soaped-over mirrors and told Grandpa stories, the cousins had holed up in bedrooms or basement corners, imagining Grandpa action figure adventures. Grandpa action figure leaps from the 15-foot upstairs balcony, creating a crater in the floor and a tsunami in Chesapeake Bay. Grandpa action figure climbs the shot tower. Grandpa action figure waits until all the mourners have left and then comes home. We're not even supposed to have visitations like that, are we? Marty asked. Open coffins? Nope. I have no idea whose idea that was. My dad hated it. Abruptly, Leo put his face in his hands. Leo didn't generally leave even his laughter unguarded, and Marty wasn't sure how to react. Rainbows rolled down the window. It was possible, Marty realized, that he would never eat another Blintz. He'd never really liked them. Or he'd only liked them sitting across from Uncle L in Baltimore in the middle of the night. So, where do we sit? He finally asked, your dad and I. At the funeral home. With a visible effort, Leo lifted his head, steadied himself. It's just because it's Shabbat. The Shomer Pro was already on his way to Virginia for the weekend. He'll be back tomorrow. And the blank says he'll come early in the morning and spell you. Robbie the blank? You know any other blanks we're related to? That jabbing tone was an inheritance from Uncle L. How old had Marty been before realizing he didn't actually like it? So I go to the funeral home once the body gets there and I just sit? I think you're technically supposed to recite psalms. Obviously you don't have to do that. You just guard him. From what? Embalming? I don't know, Marty. I've never done it, all right? I've never heard of doing it. It's just my dead dad, and apparently someone's supposed to guard him, and immediate family aren't allowed, and my mom thought of you. Do it or don't. Taken aback. Again, by the nakedness of the emotion more than the emotion itself, Marty shifted in his seat, waved a hand in the air. Of course I'll do it, Leo. I already said I would. I'm honored. It's a mitzvah, supposedly. I'd do it if it were a mortal sin. Thank you, Marty. Just guard him, okay? Stay awake. Be with him. Ferry my dad to the afterlife. Do we believe in the afterlife? Since when does Judaism require belief? 90 minutes later, armed with his sketch pad, a Tanakh, and a travel boggle set, you got a pretty good shot at beating him for once, Leo said as he handed it over. Marty let his mother drive him to the Rosenberg funeral home. As he opened the passenger side door, she grabbed his hand and said, My little brother is going in the ground. I'm glad you're going to be with him. And then, when Marty had kissed her sopping cheek, I bet someone in there could find you a razor and some shaving cream. Marty held his mother's hand. They probably have really good tires, too. That's just morbid, his mother said, smiled, sobbed, and left him in the rain. For just a moment, turning to the building, he thought there'd been a mistake. The Rosenberg home was low and rectangular and long, flanked on both ends by poplar trees and fronted by a wide circular driveway. Before the front doors, lined up single file, hearses sat silent, their back curtains drawn, reminding Marty disconcertingly of taxis queuing for airport passengers. So, a funeral home, all right, but a deserted one, judging from the utter lightlessness in there. And a Chinese one, if the character-covered hand-painted signs in the black windows were any indication. Midnight dim sum, Marty thought vaguely. The weight of the day, of watching his uncle die, his cross-country trip, his mother's tears and his cousins and his aunts all settling over him. That would certainly be a proper way of performing Shomer. Shomering? For Uncle L. Dazed, with chilly water droplets creeping into his collar and down his back, Marty moved up the steps between the hearses. He half expected to see drivers snoozing at the wheel or poring over tomorrow's racing form for Pimlico. But the hearses were empty. Reaching the front doors, he raised a hand to his eyes and squinted into the blackness. The new face appeared so fast that Marty mistook it at first for his reflection, which was kind of funny, given that the tiny man who opened the door wore a white robe, had white hair tied back in a ponytail, and was Chinese. Chinese-American, as it turned out. Mr. Bernstein? The man said, bowing slightly. What? Oh, no, but yes, I'm here for him. For L. Bernstein. My name's different. Marty. The white-haired man just stood in the doorway, still the only visible form in the sea of blankness behind him, studying Marty's face. Even with the door open, Marty heard no sounds from inside the home. But you are the Shomer, yes? The white-haired man pronounced the word perfectly, Hebraically. At least it sounded that way to Marty. Bowing again, the white-haired man said, "I am sorry for your loss. This way." Turning, he moved into the dimness, his robe seeming to float on it like a paper lantern. Marty followed. Halfway across the long foyer, or whatever it was, his eyes began to adjust, and he started to make out shapes. A circular reception desk, rooms to the right, one with a door wide open. A single room to the left, with larger double doors, also open. To the left of those doors stood a single large vase of long-stemmed flowers. Drained of their color by the dimness, they looked like scratches in the dark, gestural impressions of flowers, as in Chinese scroll painting. The rug beneath Marty's feet felt deep and soft and dark, like earth, he thought, which was appropriate enough. Jewish funerals were about returning as quickly and simply as possible to the clay from which we were made. Ahead of him, the white robe descended down a staircase draped in even deeper shadow, and Marty hesitated at the edge of it. As usual, he felt ill-prepared, and also, he had to admit, a little nervous, and then ridiculous. If he were indeed a ferryman, well, what had he thought this river would look like? He started down. Only after he'd reached the bottom did the Chinese man switch on the overhead fluorescents. They didn't twitch or hum, just revealed the long, sterile hallway. No carpet here, no flowers, only hospital-gray linoleum, open doorways spaced quite a ways apart, a couple of empty gurneys tucked neatly against the blank white walls, one gold filigreed coffin, empty and unlatched, standing upright. Not his uncle's coffin, then. If El had had his way, he'd have gone in the ground naked, without any box whatsoever, to speed his return to the earth. It's what Jews did, apparently. But neither his sister nor his wife had been able to stomach that idea, so they'd gone for the simple pine receptacle. "This way, please," said the Chinese man, and led him directly into the first room, where again he waited until Marty was beside him to turn on the light. The door swung shut automatically behind him. All at once, Marty closed his eyes. He wasn't ready to see his uncle's body again, or rather his face, what had been his face and so obviously wasn't anymore. But when he opened his eyes, he saw a square, small, closet-like room, wedged not quite lengthwise because it wouldn't fit, against one wall, sat someone's old green couch, the middle pillow squashed down almost level with the frame, but the other pillows puffed up in brighter green as though no one had ever sat on them. In front of the couch sat a low coffee table with a single reading lamp and a scattering of books on it. One of them, at least, was a Tanakh. The spine said so in plain transliterated English. "Do not please open the door," the Chinese man said, and before Marty realized what was happening, could formulate even one of his half-dozen questions or even ask which door, because there were two in there other than the one through which he'd come, the Chinese man left. For the first few minutes, Marty just stood in the center of the room. Before it had become the Shomer Pro's office, or whatever it now was, this had clearly been a closet. It was too small, the walls too bare for it to have been anything else. Adjacent to the couch, almost completely blocking the wooden door at the back of the room, sat a squat bookcase with a few more books lying haphazardly atop each other, halfway leaning out of themselves. On the wall facing the couch, he was surprised to see a square window at eye level. But whatever it looked out upon, not the parking lot, surely, because there were more rooms in that direction, and because he had to be at least 10 feet underground. Marty had no view of it, because on the other side of the glass, heavy blue curtains had been drawn all the way closed. Beside the bookshelves sat another low table upon which sat a single empty glass and a full pitcher of water. The glass looked pitiful standing there, and disconcertingly like a vessel in a ritual. The Elijah cup, placed just so, in what Marty was certain was the precise center of the table. Underneath the table stood a small stack of magazines. Slowly, carefully, as though afraid of disturbing something, Marty leaned closer, then blinked in surprise. Almost laughed. Crossword master challenges? Either the Shomer Pro kept a private stash down here for between-psalm entertainment, or this room really had been prepared specifically with Uncle El in mind. From somewhere deep in the bowels of the Rosenberg home, far away from the Shomer room, something metallic tapped. Tapped again. Then came a rattling clatter, not loud but startling in the absolute silence that had preceded it, like bare feet racing down a hall. Marty opened the door through which he'd come, stuck his head out, but the Chinese man had turned off the lights out there again, and he could see nothing. He put out his hand, felt around for the switch, couldn't find it. The stairs were just to the right, he knew. He wasn't as far from the drizzly, dreary outside world as he felt, nor was he alone in the building, clearly, despite the silence rushing back in around him, filling his ears completely, as if he'd suddenly sunk into water. Only as he retreated back into the Shomer room and the little bubble of light from the single overhead bulb did the question he really should have asked occur to him. Where was Uncle El? The answer seemed obvious enough. He was behind the blue curtain, in the room with the door Marty wasn't supposed to open. Unless that was the other door, and he was meant to go straight through this one, sit down next to the coffin, assuming his uncle was in the coffin, and... No. The tools of the Shomer's trade, the Tanakh, the couch, the water, the light, were in this room. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, Marty thought inanely. Except that there was no man behind the curtain, not anymore. And his job was to make sure no one else paid any attention to whatever was left behind. Abruptly another thought surfaced, dragging with it emotions Marty had forgotten were down there, or convinced himself he'd buried, and he sat hard on the depressed pillow and gripped his knees with his hands. The irony was not lost on him, was in fact unmistakable. For 20 years, more, he'd longed for just one more night alone with Uncle El, like when he was a kid, and El had taken the train down from college and spirited Marty away to the diner for blintzes, to some minor league baseball stadium he'd never been able to find since, where fans hooted every time their Owls scored or threatened to score, to the Delaware shore in the dark in the middle of winter to swim for 30 seconds in their underwear, and then drive straight back home, shivering, singing along to awful country songs on El's old car radio. So much of the code Marty used for processing the world, the numbers and slashes for transcribing baseball games and scorecard boxes, the slanting or adjacent -ing and -ed and and -un combinations that signaled opportunity on a boggle board, the squiggles and dots of trope in Torah portions in prayer books that indicated changes of pitch or chances to make the secret pretend farting noise with your lips. He'd learned from El on those nights. And now his wish had been granted. They were going to spend one more night alone together. Did you know? He found himself mouthing, almost saying into the empty room, straight to the blue curtain while he imagined his uncle sitting up just on the other side, leaning his ear to the glass. Did you ever understand? All those years you made fun of me for being resentful when you started bringing Robbie and Leo and my sister along. How hard that was for me. What a jolt that was. Realizing that those nights, that magic, wasn't between us like I'd always thought. It was all you. That what you were great at, what you loved, wasn't showing the magic to me, just showing it to kids. All kids. It wasn't quite true, Marty knew. Wasn't so simple. Certainly wasn't fair, and never had been. He was weeping anyway, feeling every bit the selfish brat El had made him feel he was, later, sometimes, without ever saying so. But it wasn't selfishness, Uncle El, Marty thought, wiping viciously at his face. Not only. I just don't think you ever understood what it meant to have a companion like you, then realized that that companion wasn't really for you, that there aren't anywhere near enough companions in the world to go around, that there aren't enough freezing, free nights to swim in, that you actually didn't have that much to say to me once I was old enough to start wanting to share my wonders with you. That wasn't fair either, although it was at least a little true. By the time Marty had been old and fully formed enough to want to show his uncle his discovery, El had kids of his own, work responsibilities, dry cleaning and milk to stop for on the way home, his aging parents' endless little illnesses, the 1,000 tiny obligations of adult life that Marty had learned much later, stole away all but the most essential friends and interests and nephews, simply by eliminating the time for them. Nevertheless, Marty mouthed, not quite daring to whisper, but speaking directly to the blue curtain, in the end, you were less interested in me than I was in you, Uncle El, weren't you? Without realizing he was doing it, Marty found himself opening his sketchbook, slipping a charcoal pencil out of its case, starting to make quick, gentle strokes across the top of a page. These were softer strokes than his usual, made with twitches of his fingers, as though he were brushing lint off a suit coat rather than drawing. His uncle's bumpy head slowly took shape under his pencil, so that Marty's hands seemed to be cradling it as they created it. The tears he was crying were grateful ones now, not angry, not sad, not any more. Thank you, Uncle El, he was thinking. Thank you for so many things. The tapping started again, startling him even though it sounded far away. And then, from even farther, he heard a long, high-pitched, unmistakably human sigh, and another, except it wasn't a sigh. Only the distance made it seem like one, Marty could tell by the hitch in the voice, the way it wavered, soared upward, choked off. Somewhere in the Rosenberg home, someone was wailing. Baruch atah Adonai, he found himself saying, setting the sketch pad on the table. He started singing, softly but out loud now. He sang the blessing all the way to the end. Shehechianu, v'kimanu, v'higianu. Only as he finished did he realize how wrong his choice of blessing was. Thank you, God, for letting us reach this day? Well, maybe it wasn't completely wrong. He was grateful, or at least there was nowhere else he'd rather have been. Another wail. 2 taps. Then a thunderous rattle, much closer, that launched Marty off the couch toward the door next to the blue curtain, then out into the hall, which was still dark, silent the second he emerged. Or almost silent. Not quite. Somewhere, not too far, something, a bunch of somethings, were rustling, low and steady, like closeted clothes and hanging bags, with a hand moving through them. Hello? Marty said. Naturally, he'd forgotten his cell phone. He had no idea what time it was. The wailing, when it came, was clearer out here. A woman's voice, saw-edged and exhausted, rushing at him through the dark. He ducked back into the Shomer room, pushing the door closed rather than waiting for it, and stood a moment with tears drying on his face while the wail faded slowly to an echo. Only several long seconds later, when the wail had faded completely, did Marty realize the rustling was in the room with him. If there had been light in the hall, he might have bolted right then. He almost did anyway, but something held him rigid, absolutely still, a weight, a grip on both his arms. Carefully, he swung his head around to look. What he saw was the couch, with its sunken middle pillow, the bare walls, his sketch pad with his uncle's head just taking shape there, featureless yet already unmistakably L's. At least it was unmistakable to Marty. Nothing else. The grip on his arms lessened a little, slipped away, and Marty heard himself say, "No, wait. It's just my dead dad," Leo had said. Someone supposed to guard him. In one step, Marty moved to the window and pressed his face to the glass, trying to locate a slit in the curtains. He wanted to see, to perform his assigned task for Uncle L, but whoever had arranged those curtains had done so with purpose. They weren't just pinned together, but sewn shut down the center, then tacked in place at the corners. No light from this room spilled into that one, and no hint of what was in there filtered through to Marty. He hesitated one moment longer, and only then because the rustling started again. It wasn't in the Shomer room. It was in the walls, or else it was behind the blue curtain, with L. The resumption of the rattle and clatter drowned it out, even though the clatter came from farther away, and when it ceased, the rustling did too. Marty heard the tailing, sobbing end of a wail. Just what sort of training, he wondered, did a professional Shomer receive? Then he reached out, grabbed the knob on the door next to the window, and turned it. Locked. More rustling. It's in there, Marty thought. It's with L. With a snarl, he threw himself at the door, twisting the knob, which wasn't locked after all, just a little stuck. The realization flooded him with simultaneous relief and horror as the door swung open. Air rushed out, stale and old. Too late, he wondered if he should maybe have grabbed a Tanakh or something. Did he know any Psalms? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow. Wait, did you say that one? The light switch this time was where it should have been, on the wall right next to the door. Marty fumbled, flipped it. He stared. Then, through his tears and the heart hammering that threatened to splinter his rib cage, he started to laugh. He couldn't help it. Marty action figure braves the closed door, flings it free, and liberates the bathroom. When his breathing had calmed and his tears had stopped for the time being, and the uneasy spasm-like laughter had quieted in his throat, Marty washed his face in cool water, dried his hands on the neatly hung towel. No mirror, but then there wouldn't be in a Shomer's room, or else the glass would be soaped over. Leaving the bathroom door open but switching off the light, he returned to the couch. For a long time he sat and sketched. He didn't think more about Uncle L, or at least he didn't think anything specific. In his heart was a weight, but the weight came from accumulated memories, 35 years of everyday bedrock love, not loss. Or rather, bedrock love and loss had become synonymous now, maybe more than synonymous, different words for the same feeling. Maybe that's why Jews almost seem to celebrate this experience, mark it with food and ritual storytelling, clutch it to their breasts.